Hey guys, welcome back to the shop. Today I'm going to be sharing some tips and tricks that I use for preparing and turning acrylic and mixed material blanks. So over the years doing Dunkin Junk, I've learned quite a few different things that kind of stack the cards in my favor to help me get through some of the more difficult blanks and even just acrylic blanks. So hopefully this will help you guys get better results when you're turning acrylic and mixed material blanks. So let's get started. Alright guys, so I just released my new pinstripe pen blanks. They're a fusion of 3D printed materials and resin casting. And so I wanted to put a video together that just kind of walks through how I prepare acrylic and mixed material blanks, as well as, go over a few tips that'll help you kind of make sure that you get good results when you're turning stuff like this. And the thing is, when you're embedding things in resin, you have to understand that it's just a mechanical bond between the resin and whatever the object or material is. So in the case of wood or something that's porous, it's going to be a pretty good bond because there's lots of little cracks and crevices, grooves for that resin to kind of hold on to. It's not a, very smooth, solid surface. In the case of plastics and things like that, it's a little bit of a weaker bond because there's less for that resin to grab onto. So these pinstripe blanks should be fine. I haven't had any problems myself turning them, but that's kind of why I wanted to put this video together. And it's not just for these pinstripe blanks. This is what I do pretty much for all of the Dunkin Junk blanks that we make. I take some steps, some precautions when I'm preparing blanks, and I do some things. There's a few tips and tricks and things that I do when I'm turning them that I wanted to share just to make sure everybody gets good results with these blanks. And if you're doing Dunkin Junk experiments, making some cool embedded object blanks, I want to make sure that you guys get good results. So let's go through some of these tips. I'm going to kind of start with some basics, and then I'm going to kind of go through some more specific things for mixed material blanks. But one thing I want to do, I want to stop and say is that no matter how you prepare a blank, how you turn them, things happen when you're turning. So, just plain old wood or acrylic blanks can, blow up on the lathe when you're turning them. Things happen. Same thing with these mixed material blanks. It's not going to be a, guaranteed perfect turn, but it should stack the cards in your favor to kind of minimize any problems. So first things first, you got to start with sharp tools. It doesn't matter what you're turning. You have to have sharp tools or else you're not going to get good results. The reason for that is dull tools are putting more pressure. They're going to apply more forces and pressures on the blank, and it's not going to work out as well. In the case of acrylics, if it's dull and you start applying more pressure, it can chip or crack or blow up. If it's a mixed material, it can destabilize the bond or just apply enough pressure to force the two materials apart. Sharp tools are a must. Second thing, you want to be turning as fast as you can go safely. In the case of pens, I don't care what kind of material it is, I would recommend just turning the lathe all the way up. You're going to get a better cut. It's just, you're getting more cuts. It's going to be a smoother cut, and it really doesn't matter what material. But in the case of acrylics and mixed materials, you want to be going as fast as possible, definitely. So faster speeds are going to be better. The other thing is you want to avoid heat. Don't overheat the blank, whether you're drilling it or when you're turning it or sanding even. Overheating acrylic blanks, they can shatter if they get too hot. Or in the case of mixed materials, when you're drilling, if you're not clearing the chips and that blank gets too hot, it can weaken the bond between the materials, and then when you get it over to the lathe, it's just going to come apart when you start applying some of those forces and pressures to it. Now, when it comes to preparing pen blanks, the glue bond between the tube and the blank is critical. I think that if you don't have, or if you have an area where that blank isn't being held down, completely to the tube, you're probably going to be really prone to blowouts. And I actually think that that's one of the main causes of blowouts on acrylic blanks. The blank can kind of warp. Once you've gotten it turned down pretty thin, it can warp, and that tool can kind of grab on, and then when it stops moving, it'll just shatter it. And I think that making sure that you have a good glue bond will lower your chances of getting a blowout on acrylics and definitely on mixed materials. Now, I just released a video that walks you through how I glue tubes in, and I think it's a good method. I've gotten good results I've been doing it for like 2 years, and I really have pretty much eliminated blowouts on acrylic, just plain acrylics. And I don't really have too many problems when I'm doing mixed material blanks. I've never really had one of those just blowouts. And I think that it's there's two reasons for that with my method. One, I apply glue to the tube and the inside of the blank. And I think it would be, regardless of what glue you're using, I think that's a good way to go on acrylics. It just makes sense. You generally are going to apply glue on two surfaces and put them together. That's going to increase your chances of a good glue bond all the way. The other thing is, what I apply to the inside of the blank is thin CA glue. And in the case of mixed material blanks, if there are any weak areas, problematic things going on with the bond between the resin and the material that you have embedded, that thin CA glue is going to increase the strength of the bond between them. It's going to kind of glue it together, basically, and hold those things together. So I think that that is actually one of the reasons why I'm pretty successful with all the crazy Dunkin Junk things we do every week. Just because I douse the inside of the blanks with thin CA. Now, I have a couple other tips, so if you haven't seen that video, go check that out. There's it's not anything too crazy, but it's a good method that I've had good results for a couple of years. Now, if you get good results doing, however you glue your tubes in, then there's no reason to change. But if you haven't seen that video, I definitely go check that out. See if there's anything that you can incorporate into your, method of gluing tubes in that'll help out. And, like I said, give that thin CA on the inside a try. You might find that it works pretty good. All right, so with the general guidelines and basics out of the way, let's kind of go through some of the steps. So if you're making a pen, you're going to have about 7 steps involved in the process. Number 1, you're going to cross-cut the blank to length. 2, you're going to drill it. 3, you're going to glue the tubes in. We've already covered the gluing thing. 4, you're going to square the ends up. 5, you're going to turn it. 6 and 7 are sanding and finishing. So out of all those steps, really the only problematic and critical areas are going to be drilling, gluing the tubes in, like I said, we already covered that, and turning. Now, sanding and finishing, you've already turned the blank. You should be well away from any problems at that point. The only thing I will mention about sanding is I highly recommend slowing the lathe down. I'm finding that 500 RPMs is pretty good for Alumilite, and it just seems to get me better results and actually quicker. So that's the one thing I'll say about that. Now, when it comes to cross-cutting the blanks to length, I haven't really had any problems regardless of the material I've embedded in resin for pen blanks or any kind of blank. I just don't think that it's really applying the same kind of pressures. The whole blank's there. It just, generally, you're not going to have too many problems. Definitely not going to have problems with the pinstripe blanks. The one area where you might run into some issues cutting blanks to length is things that are really brittle materials, and I'm thinking coffee bean blanks. The way to handle that is just cut the blank extra long. Give it a good 1/2 inch longer than the tube. And that way, if anything does kind of chip off the end, doesn't matter. You're going to get rid of it anyway. So that way you can either sand it back or cut it later. Now, when it comes to squaring up the ends of the blank, I don't consider that a problematic area because you can completely avoid the problems by using a sanding method to square them up. If you use a barrel trimmer, it's going to be more aggressive, and depending on what materials and whatever the blank is, you could run into problems. But in general, I've used the barrel trimmer on these pinstripe blanks, haven't really had any problems with it. However, I keep my barrel trimmers really sharp. I sharpen them all the time. So kind of depends. But if you want to avoid that problem, if you got a particularly difficult or fragile blank, just use a sanding method. And I'm going to link to Lynn Lacey's video on how he sets it up. That's the easiest and most accurate setup I have found. It's how I do it. Basically, you're just using a faceplate, apply some sticky backed sandpaper. I usually use a 60 grit, maybe 80. Use your drill chuck in the tailstock and then use the Harbor Freight punch set to find one that fits your tube, and you got a dead accurate setup, and it's super simple. So that's all. Like I said, I'll link to his video down in the description, but easy way to do it is just sand, and then you're not going to have any problems blowing out anything with a barrel trimmer. Drilling is one of the areas where you can run into some problems when you're preparing your blanks. Now, one of the things that can cause some problems is heat. If you overheat the blanks when you're drilling, it can, basically you could shatter a blank if you overheat acrylic too much. And in the case of mixed material blanks, you can weaken the bond between the materials. And it may not become apparent, when you get done drilling it, you look at your blank and glue the tube in, but when you get it on the lathe, you've weakened that bond and it can cause some problems. So you want to make sure to avoid heat at all costs. If you're using a drill press, just take very light passes. Don't go much more than like a 1/4 inch at a time. Clear those chips and keep that blank as cool as possible. Now, in the case of the pinstripe blanks, that ABS plastic material that's cast in there that creates the pinstripe effect, that stuff gets hot quick. So you really got to be even more careful with those blanks. Like I said, clear the chips, let the blank cool down again, and then take another pass. But don't take too deep a cut. It'll work out a lot better. Just keep that heat down, and everything should go pretty well. Now, the other problematic area is work holding when you're drilling, and if the blank can kind of move around, if there's play in it, a couple of things can happen. One, it can kind of move and you might get a kind of oversized hole in the end. That's not that big of a deal, but you don't really want that. You want to get as, you know, as accurate a hole as possible. That way the tube will glue in there better. The other problem that could happen is if it moves, the drill bit could actually catch or dig into the blank and then kind of shatter it. I've had that happen to me. And when I'm using pen drilling vices, I make sure that the vice jaws can't move and there's nothing moving at all. That blank is held solidly. Now, on the other hand, you also don't want to over tighten the jaws. You don't want to clamp them down to where it's like, you know, squishing it, because when you actually get done drilling, you know, you're going to drill out a lot of material in the center. And if you got those things cranked way down, it can actually kind of warp the material in the case of an acrylic blank, or in the case of the pinstripe blanks, depending on how big the hole is that you drill, you could literally crush the blank. So you got to kind of play right in the middle. You got to, you know, have enough, just enough holding to keep it in place, but make sure nothing else is moving around. Now, a couple of other things with drilling. You know, I use the drill press for square blanks, and I use a pen drilling vise. It's got the 45-degree jaws. That holds a square blank without you having to crank down the vise jaws or anything like that. It'll hold it in place. Works great. That doesn't work so well with round blanks, though, I found. And so the pinstripe blanks are round, my thin blue lines, and, you know, anything round, I found that those 45-degree jaws don't hold the blank solidly. And to avoid having to like crank down those jaws, I just move over to the lathe, use a 4-jaw chuck, and everything works a lot better. So let's head over to the lathe. I'll kind of show you my setup for drilling out round blanks, and then we'll move on to some turning tips. Okay, so over here at the lathe, I have a 4-jaw chuck. This is one of the PSI Penn State Barracudas, but I have the step jaws, and the reason I like the step jaws for this application is they have serrations. They're kind of ribbed. So this set of jaws just seems to hold these round blanks really well without having to over tighten them. So that's what I use for drilling on the lathe. Then I just have a drill chuck, and you know, everything's pretty simple. Now, when I'm drilling on the lathe, again, I'm not going to take very deep cuts. I'm going to take maybe about a 1/4 inch, back it out, let it kind of cool down, and clear those shavings out. Everything goes pretty well, but this is a pretty good setup, like I said, for square blanks or round blanks. And, you know, if you're just getting into turning pens and all that stuff, maybe you don't have a drill press, the lathe will work just fine for everything. Now, the one problem area with the lathe is you don't have anything backing up, you know, the outside, you know, the end of the cut. When the drill bit goes all the way through the blank, there's nothing that's supporting the material in the back. So one way you can get around that is either cut your blanks longer and don't drill all the way out the back. That's an area where you can get blowouts, especially with mixed material and difficult blanks. Or you could actually just glue on some wood or even, you know, acrylic or something like that onto the back so that it has something supporting that you don't mind cutting off if you need to save the material of the specific blank. So I just kind of, you know, like I said, don't lock it down too much, and that holds it perfect. It doesn't spin around. Everything's good to go. All right, guys, so we're over the lathe. It's time to start turning. We got our blank ready to rock. Again, I'm going to stop and say, you want to make sure that you're starting with sharp tools. I'm going to touch this up before I start turning this. And you want to go fast. I got my belt on high speed, and I'm going to be cranking the variable speed up. It's going to be going 4,000. And that's what I would highly recommend for any kind of pen blank, but definitely for acrylics and mixed materials. You want to be going as fast as possible. For pen blanks, you know, safety first. If you're turning a bowl, don't be turning it at 4,000. That's probably not a good idea. But pen blanks, every kind of material, fast speeds. Now, I only really have a couple of tips. You know, as long as you're following, you know, correct turning protocols, you're using the tools the way they should be used. You know, it's just a matter of a couple of things that I really do when I'm actually turning them. The first thing, and I've already actually mentioned this once, this is actually, this is my favorite insurance policy, thin CA glue. Again, if you have any, you know, brittle or chippy materials embedded in your blank, the thin CA glue will kind of soak into there and just kind of stiffen up the fibers and kind of help lock things down. Same thing goes with embedded materials where the bond may not be awesome with the resin. It will kind of help add a little bit more support. It's just a really cheap insurance policy, and I think it helps. I always have one handy when I think that a blank may be problematic in one of those two areas. Now, the other thing is just take light cuts and take your time. usually the problems occur when I'm hurrying through something or I'm trying to take too much of a big cut, get things done quicker. Light cuts especially is the case, for brittle, chippy, or, mixed materials where you have bond issues. Take light cuts and you won't be applying as many forces to that blank that would want it to make it come apart. So I'm not going to go through and show turning this entire blank. I don't think that's going to help anybody out really. So I will show a couple shots of some light cuts of me taking light cuts with this blank, and I'm going to show a couple of shots of this blank after I've turned it down a little bit, just in case anybody wants to see what this pinstripe blank looks like. But after that, I have one last tip, and it's the tip if you absolutely cannot have a blank blow up. You have to get the pen done. It's a blank that you paid a lot of money for. I got one last tip that I think it might be a little controversial, but it will ensure that you get through turning even the most difficult blanks. So we'll get through some of these turning shots, and then we'll go for the ultimate tip to make sure you get through any kind of blank that you're turning. Well, all right, guys, we got through the pinstripe blank, no problems, and I think most people are not going to have any issues. But again, with a few precautions and just taking your time and being a little bit careful when you're turning, I think most mixed material blanks shouldn't be a problem. You should be able to get through them. Now, the pinstripe blanks are available, so head over to my website. There'll be a link on the screen here and down in the description. Where they are available, they are Yankee pinstripe blanks. So head over there. They're the first iteration, and they're available now if you want to try them out. So one other tip that I have, one little last tip. If you have a particularly difficult blank that you are almost absolutely sure this thing's going to explode, but you definitely don't want it to, it's one of those, like, I got to get through this blank. The best way to go is just sand shape it. Don't put tools in there. Don't use carbide. Don't use anything. Sand shape it. And actually, even before you get it on the lathe, take it over to a disc or belt sander and actually take off as much material as you can before you even get on the lathe. Then grab a piece of plywood, anything kind of firm, hard piece of wood, and use some 80 grit, 60 grit sandpaper and just turn it with sanding only. You should pretty much be able to get through any type of difficult, or no matter what kind of blank it is, that should work. Now, you want to watch out and keep that heat down, but it's probably not going to come apart on you at that point. So a lot of people might call that cheating. I call it, hey, I got a pen out of this now. So, and this is actually what I did on the seashell blanks. I got it down. I took a lot of material off on the disc sander, and I got it down to, you know, pretty thin, and I just said, you know what, this is when it's gonna blow up. I'm just gonna make sure I get through it, and I got 2 pens out of it. So if you guys have any tips or tricks that help you get, you know, through any blanks that are difficult, or, you know, mixed material, anything like that, I'd love to hear what you guys have. Leave those down in the comments below. So if you're new to the channel, we do all kinds of resin casting focused things. We do usually turning focus, but sometimes we step outside of the turning world and just do things for fun. So if that's something that interests you, definitely hit that subscribe button so you get notified when new videos get posted. So until next time, thanks for watching this video, and I'll see you in the next one.